Wall Street went down 700 points today. Did you hear that?
I heard that.
It's amazing.
It's unbelievable.
What do you think is going to happen?
I'm a little nervous about the economy right now. My bank got taken over today by another bank, and don't really know what to think about that.
Well, a lot of people can't put it into perspective. I mean, it's really hard to figure out what to do. But,
I feel like there's a lot going on, and I don't know exactly what's going on or what's happening. And so it's kind of confusing. I don't think I understand the monetary system enough to even figure out what's actually happening. And I think most Americans probably feel that way.
Yeah. Well, you know, a lot of that started right here in Philadelphia. A lot of the early central banking and a lot of confusion about, you know, whether things should be public or private. And
Really?
yeah.
Oh.
It happened right here, as a matter of fact.
Oh, right there.
Yeah, I'll show you. There's a lot of the monetary history right here. You know, during the time of the pre-revolution period, we didn't have a regulated currency. All this different colonies were creating their own script, and it was actually a debt-free currency. And Benjamin Franklin often said that one of the reasons why the revolution happened in the first place was because the British got very jealous that the colonies were thriving so well, and that's why we had the Conscription Act of 1764 that led to the Boston Tea Party and all this rebellion in the United States, because people were enjoying debt-free currency, and the British wanted to change that, so we revolted against that.
What exactly is debt-free currency?
Debt-free currency is a currency that is not backed by a reserve base like we have presently, and we've had through most of the history of the United States. But Alexander Hamilton was one of the big proponents of indebted currency, and he actually, through his influence, had this bank created. This is the First National Bank of the United States, and this was in existence from 1791 until 1811, and at that point, at that time in the nation's history, there was this big squabble between the people like Alexander Hamilton, who thought that the power to issue currency should be in private hands, and then people like Thomas Jefferson, who thought, no, the power to issue currency should be in public hands. And it's this debate that has gone on throughout the entire history of the United States until fairly recently. But now, I think with all the economic problems that are taking place, that debate is going to come back, and people are going to be talking about whether or not it's logical to have the power to issue currency in private hands or in public hands. And but this was where it started, the First National Bank of the United States. And the reason it's so significant is that you see these two lines forming up between Hamilton and Jefferson. And you know, the Jeffersonians obviously lost the battle. So the thing is that this debate between the public and private sectors has been going back and forth for a long time, but it really started with the First National Bank of the United States. And First National Bank of the United States was decommissioned. Its charter ran out in 1811, but it led to subsequent problems in which we reconstituted a new Bank of the United States. And you know, it just kept the confusion going, and it was a huge issue during the 19th century. There's a lot of debate about whether the power to issue currency should be in public or private hands. Actually, the Constitution itself said that the power to issue currency should be in the hands of Congress, and some people have interpreted that to mean that Congress could do whatever they wanted by outsourcing it to private hands. Or the literalists said, no, what it really means is that the people themselves should have a decision-making power over Congress and have oversight in the issuance of currency. So it's very interesting. And actually, you know, before the First National Bank of the United States was started, it existed in, it actually started up here in what's called Carpenter's Hall, which became famous during the Revolutionary period. But afterwards, this was actually the foundation of the First National Bank of the United States before it was transferred into the building that we just saw. This whole area is Independence National Park, and that's why a lot of these landmarks are still preserved. It's a park of the federal government here in the United States.
I didn't know Philadelphia had such a history with the banks.
Yeah, it's an interesting history, but a lot of it's been forgotten, and that's why I think it's important whenever people come into Philadelphia. I like to take them on this little tour here because all of these landmarks remind us of the prehistory that we've forgotten. And there's a reason that we've forgotten it, because as I say, this was a very, very important issue to people right from the beginning of the country up until the early part of the 20th century. But the main thing to remember is that, you know, as mankind has evolved in the issuance of currency, we've gone from barter to issuing small tokens to issuing commodity-based money, to issuing paper money, and now to issuing electronic money. At each stage, things have gotten more and more abstract, and we've gotten further and further away from the roots of money in precious resources, and we've also devalued community as a result. And as that abstraction has taken place, the power of people to have any say over their currency has been diminished greatly. Yeah, this is the Second National Bank of the United States. It also has an equally interesting history because the bank was created after the War of 1812, when the United States couldn't pay its war debts, and they realized that they had to quickly engineer a means of financing the government, and they decided to embark on the same experiment that they had for the first 20 years between 1791 and 1811. So they actually opened up this bank to be a chartered bank for the next 20 years. So between 1816 and 1836, the Second National Bank of the United States functioned. And this was equally unpopular. In fact, in 1832, Andrew Jackson decided to veto this bank. And between 1832 and 1836, the bank was in great turmoil, and ultimately its charter was not renewed. But the Second National Bank of the United States was in many ways a kind of repeat of the story of the First National Bank of the United States, in that it lasted 20 years, it was highly unpopular among the public, and it was finally decommissioned, and its charter was not renewed. And Andrew Jackson made great political hay out of his opposition to this bank, as did Thomas Jefferson to his opposition of the First National Bank of the United States. So after that era happened, we went into an era where money was being issued by the states themselves and not by the federal government. And it led to certain depressions, and it led to a lot of confusion, and it really wasn't the best solution because the monies that were issued were not debt-free. And then during the Civil War, President Lincoln needed to raise money to fight the war, and he issued a debt-free currency called the greenback, and that existed from 1862 to 1863. And as a result of that, the Congress passed a couple acts in the 1860s called the National Bank Act and the Contraction Act, and that effectively ended the power of debt-free currency, and it created a mandate that the government would have an indebted currency after that. So in other words, it would be private interests who would be issuing the currency on their behalf and allowing the United States government to be the agents of that. And so, unfortunately, the debt-free currency we've had in the United States has only existed a couple of times before the existence of the United States, when we had a scrip currency until 1764, and then for 2 years in 1862 and 1863, that we could really claim to have had a debt-free currency. The rest of the history of the United States has been all about indebted currencies issued by private banks. The crazy thing is that the Constitution itself that was crafted here at Independence Hall guaranteed Congress the right to issue money and to control the issuance of currency. The way I read that is that it should be in the hands of people. The way Congress has interpreted it, or the way that the legal authorities have interpreted it, is that it should be in the hands of private interests. And what happened then in 1913 is after we had the Depression of 1893 and the Depression of bank panic of 1907, the Federal Reserve was created in 1913. And all of that political awareness that took place in the 19th century suddenly was gone. And so people really didn't care much anymore about the fact that the power to issue currency was in private hands. So it's not a big issue anymore to most people. Whereas, like I say, in the 19th century, it was a huge issue. You know.
I would think most people today do not think that currency is being issued by private banks. If you asked these people on the street, they would probably say it's public.
Yeah, there's a reason for that. You know, the Federal Reserve does not want you to think of it as private, you know, that's why they use the name federal to create the illusion that it's a you know, that it's a public bank. But in fact, it is a private bank. If you look up, for example, if you look in the phone book under government agencies, you won't find the Federal Reserve listed. You have to go into the white pages under its own listing and you'll find it. But as one fellow is fond of saying, the Federal Reserve Bank is no more a federal agency than FedEx.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So largely then when we have this bailout and we have Wall Street and the Federal Reserve dictating to the Treasury Secretary and the Treasury Secretary telling Congress what we need to be doing to clean up this economic mess that we're in, the problem is that there's no public input and the people themselves are not being consulted. And this, in my view, is going to lead to a big turmoil, because when people finally get the fact that the issuance of money should be a public right, it'll be too late. And at that point, we're going to be facing a real crisis in the United States. And as I say, the crazy thing is that a lot of that happened here in this area where we've been witnessing history and thinking of it as not relevant to us, but in fact, it's very relevant to us. So it's a real wake-up call for everybody.